Hello. Thanks for having me, everybody. My name's Molly McCoy Brack, and I'm the director at Agora Crisis Center. Hopefully you guys have heard of Agora, but if not, I'll give you the nutshell version of our history and what we do. In 1970, a freshman student at UNM approached a professor and said that he needed to talk to somebody about some problems he was having. He tried to get help at the counseling center. They couldn't see him for a couple weeks. He tried to get help off campus, and he couldn't pay, so he couldn't get an appointment. And so feeling hopeless, this 18-year-old kid ended his life that night. And in response to his death, a group of students and professors at UNM said, you know, why wasn't there somewhere that guy could have gone or called and just had somebody talk with him and be kind to him, and maybe that would have kept him alive to the next day and he could have gotten more help. So they founded Agora as a crisis center that anyone in the world can call and talk about anything. You don't have to be in crisis. Many of our callers are just calling because they're having a bad day, or maybe they need to find resources in the community. We have a population of familiar callers who have been diagnosed with a mental illness, or maybe they have a chronic physical illness, and they just call us every day to check in for a few minutes and talk about their soap operas and their cat and their groceries, and we're happy to talk with them for a few minutes every day if that helps keep them safe and helps keep them, off the streets or out of the hospital. So anybody can call Agora, talk about anything. We take about 40,000 calls a year now. I started volunteering in '91, and we were taking 1,200 calls a year. And so we're very busy, and we have about 200 volunteers who answer our phones and our chat lines. And so our volunteers go through 40 hours of nationally accredited training, and then they come in for a 4-hour shift once a week to help strangers who are in distress. And I think that's amazing. Every trimester we do training, and I train about 50 new people, but I turn away 100. So there's that many people in our community, and mostly UNM students because we're on campus. There's that many people who want to show up for 4 hours a week and just help strangers who are in distress. So I'm really proud of Agora and of our volunteers, and I like to make sure people understand what our services are. So we have our telephone helpline, which we say is available 24/7 based on the availability of volunteers. So because we are volunteer staffed and we are strongly committed to the volunteer model, because research shows us that volunteers have the best outcomes in this kind of work, but we don't always have overnight volunteers. But we do sometimes. So we tell people, if you call and you don't get an answer, we're always sorry that happens, but you can call another number on our voicemail, or you can leave a message and we'll call you back and do our best to answer every call. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what Agora does. We do a lot of community education, so we do things like this. We do a lot of suicide awareness and intervention workshops, including a 2-day one called Assist, and that's sort of the gold standard around the world. It's an evidence-based model. It's the one used by the military, and it's an amazing training, and I'd love to get one going in Santa Fe, and I'll let you guys know if we do. That's the only one that we charge something for. But other than that, we'll come talk to groups. I always say I'll talk as long as people will hold still. So I'll talk for 5 minutes and just say, here's Agora, and this is what we do, have a brochure. Or I'll talk for 2 whole days about suicide awareness and intervention, whatever is helpful for your group. So any questions about Agora, first of all?
Yeah. So I'm fairly new to Santa Fe. I've only been here about 6 weeks. And I was just wondering, would you ever consider setting up a satellite office here in Santa Fe?
I would love that. I'm not sure exactly how we could make it work. For sure, chat volunteers can work remotely. Our phones are always answered at our crisis center because we have a whole system set up in case there's an emergency, but our chat volunteers can work remotely. So we could talk and see if maybe we could figure it out. So tonight we're going to talk about safety planning. Usually at Agora, the most common time that we use safety planning is when we're talking with a caller who's having thoughts of suicide. So of those 40,000 calls we take every year, about 20% of our callers are thinking about suicide at some level. And about 5% of our callers are really at imminent risk. That means that they've made a plan, they have access to the means, and their life is in immediate danger. So that's a small percentage of our calls, but it's certainly a situation that we want to be well trained and well prepared for. But those 20% that call us to talk about suicide, at some level, maybe they're contemplating it, maybe they've lost somebody to suicide, maybe they're worried about someone in their life who's having thoughts of suicide. So we like to tell people that we are a crisis center that will talk to you all day about suicide, and try to help you figure out how to stay safe and hear your story. So the safety planning at Agora is always done with callers who are able to say that they feel a little better after a conversation. It doesn't mean that their thoughts of suicide are gone, though, because our one magical conversation is probably not going to fix everything that's going on with them, but it may have relieved their distress enough that they're able to commit to stay safe. And so when that happens, we start to work with them on a safety plan. So safety plans are, typically they're usually about suicide and suicidal ideation, but I think that safety plans can be used for any kind of crisis. And it's not just for people with a mental health diagnosis, it's for any of us. All of us have those days, right, when we feel bad, when we're anxious, when we're kind of sad, and sometimes we don't even understand why. And so I think it's not a bad idea for all of us to have a safety plan, or you could call it a self-care plan, that helps you think ahead of time, what am I going to do when I find myself in crisis? And crisis can be on a spectrum, right? And we also know that crisis is really subjective. What's a crisis for me might not be for you, and vice versa. And that's one of our mantras at Agora, is that everyone's entitled to their crisis. And we try never to tell people that whatever they're upset about today, isn't that bad, or it'll get better, or it'll pass. Because when we're in crisis, that's the worst crisis there could ever be, when we're in the middle of it. And so we try really diligently to validate people's feelings and try to understand and have empathy and compassion for their crisis, not how we think it would be if it was us, right? Or when we were in a similar situation even. So we're going to talk tonight specifically about safety planning, and sometimes I do this over a 4-hour workshop. I'll try not to do that tonight, so I'm going to probably talk kind of fast, but we'll try to get through it, and then if you have questions afterwards, you can always contact me and I'll be happy to talk with you about anything that wasn't clear. So, what is a safety plan? So the goal of a safety plan is for people to have a tool to use if they feel a crisis coming on and they're not sure they can stay safe. And a safe could mean a variety of things. It might mean safe from suicide. It might mean safe from a panic attack, anxiety, depression, all those kind of mental health situations that we find ourselves in that are distressing and that we sometimes need help to get through. So a safety plan gives people a tangible tool, hopefully written down, and some people put them on their phones. There are safety planning apps that you can download that are kind of cool, and I can tell you more about those later if you want to. But we try to make people, we ask them to write the safety plan down, because the point is that when you're in crisis, you don't want to have to stop and think, what are all those things I talked about doing, or what are all those things that I said might help me? You want to have it written down somewhere easy to access so you can go and get it and use it when you need to. So at Agora, typically we'll have a call with somebody, maybe they'll feel a little better at the end of the call, but then they're going to, wake up at 3 in the morning. And they're going to feel that depression or that anxiety or maybe thoughts of suicide again. And so that's when we want people to have something that's going to empower them to have some control over their situation, because a lot of people with mental illness or thoughts of suicide feel like they're kind of at the mercy of those thoughts. That when they come on, you feel like you're starting to spin out of control, you feel like nothing's going to help, you feel like maybe you're not worth helping anyway. Because we know that especially depression is a self-sustaining disease. Depression tells you not to do the things that might help you feel better, because they won't work, they're not worth it, you're not fixable, nobody cares, right? That's the self-talk that sometimes we have when we're in a depression. And so your safety plan is something that's going to help you push through anyway, even when you're having those thoughts. So just like we do fire drills in public buildings, or we do the little safety drill on the airplane, we do those in hopes that we're never going to use them. But we want to practice so that if the time comes when we do have an emergency, it'll just be kind of muscle memory to us, and we'll already have thought through what are the things that are going to help keep me safe and help me feel better. We want you to plan ahead of time. So it's a proactive way for people to feel empowered to have some control over those situations when they start to feel really out of control. So typically safety plans are done by, I might refer to the person at risk, and again, risk can be on a spectrum, a continuum. They might be at risk of suicide, they might be at risk of just, not being able to sleep all night because that hamster wheel is spinning in their head with thoughts that, are not going to let them sleep. So when I say risk, that's on a spectrum. So the person at risk, and they may have a helper that's helping them make this safety plan. They might be doing it alone though, and so if you're doing your own safety plan by yourself, you might consider running it by a trusted friend or therapist or somebody who can help you evaluate the items that you've put on your safety plan. But if you're doing it collaboratively with somebody, that can be really helpful too. And we'll talk about the role of the helper and then what it's like to be the person at risk planning. Do you have a question? Yes, don't hesitate to interrupt me at any point. So a safety plan should be done when there's not immediate risk. So it's more helpful to do it when the person at risk is able to think clearly, is not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, is not in the middle of having a suicidal ideation day, or they're not in the middle of having a psychotic episode. So safety planning ideally should be done when the person is safe at the moment. Because if somebody is in imminent danger, like if we're on the phone with somebody who's thinking of suicide, and they have a plan and they have means and they tell us, yeah, I'm pretty sure I want to do it, that's not the time to make a safety plan. That's the time to establish safety first. Right? So the individual should be able to think clearly while they're making this plan and be able to create a plan that they have some reasonable chances of success in following. Because we never want to set somebody up for failure, and then that makes you just feel even worse. So the safety plan has to be done in the person at risk's own words, and the work has to be done from them. They're the ones that we want to come up with the ideas and the goals and the tools that they think will work best for them. Because if we're the helper, what we think will work best for them, I don't know, maybe it doesn't really matter. It's only going to work if it comes from them, and they can tell you, yes, this is a thing that's helped me in the past, this is something I think might help me if I was having a crisis, and then we can validate them and encourage them and help them think through how to implement the plan. So again, it's best if it's written down, and it could be in somebody's phone, whether you have an app or you just make a memo on your phone and do it, but it's good to have it easily accessible. So we tell people if you write it down on paper, like stick it on your fridge with a magnet or put it on your bedside table or somewhere that you're not going to have to stop and think, what did I do with that safety plan? Where is it? And rifling through doors at 3 in the morning. You want to be able to find it quickly and remember to use it. Now again, one of the biggest challenges to getting people to use their safety plan is that when you're in the middle of that crisis, you sometimes feel like it's not going to work. It wouldn't be worth getting out, I'm not going to bother. And so that's part of the plan, is to remind yourself, if you think that it's not worth bothering, do it anyway. Like, give it a shot, because you went to the work of making the safety plan, you might as well give it a try. Maybe it will help. So if you're somebody who's helping someone else come up with a safety plan, and you're in the position of being the listener, the first most important thing to do is just hear their story. And so letting somebody talk really honestly and frankly about what their situation is, what kind of challenges they're facing, what happens for them when they start to experience a crisis. Let them just tell their story and resist the urge to jump in and fix it for them. Because we all want to do that, right? We all want our loved ones to feel better, right? And so often what we want to do is when they tell us, things are so terrible that I'm thinking death would be better, I'm considering ending my life. And we, with all good intentions, say, I'm sure things aren't that bad. It'll be okay tomorrow. Let's go to a movie and get your mind off of it. Right? We say those things with good intentions, but how could that be heard by a person who's just told you they're thinking of suicide?
It's minimalizing their problem.
Yeah.
Like it's making it, it's making it feel like their problem doesn't matter.
Yeah, and even though we don't mean it that way, it's kind of like invalidating. Like, they're there, that little problem you just mentioned, wanting to die, it's not that big a deal. Let's move on. Let's go to a movie. Let's watch TV. And again, we think that that's going to help to get people's mind off of it. And there's a point in the safety plan where we'll talk about the value of some distraction. But when you're hearing somebody's story, distraction is not what you want to do. You want to help them focus on their story and be able to get it out. I always feel like, especially when somebody's depressed or maybe thinking of suicide, they may have some good stuff in their life, they may have reasons for living, and it's like they're packed at the bottom of a big suitcase. The good stuff is at the bottom. And you can't see it until you're able to unpack all the stress and anxiety and depression and things going on in your life that are making you think maybe it would be better off if I just ended my life. Because suicide, I think, is not about wanting to be dead. It's about wanting pain to end. And when we're in excruciating pain, whether it's physical or psychological or emotional, our instincts are to make that pain end however we can do it. And so that's when suicide comes up as a solution for people, honestly. And so if they're having thoughts of suicide, again, people are really nervous about talking about that. And that's I can come back another day and we can talk all day about how you have that conversation. But the important thing is that if somebody tells you that they're thinking of suicide, we want to be sure that they're safe, we want to talk to them about, what kind of plan they might have and do they have access to lethal means. But honestly, I think the first thing that I like to say, and I like to train my volunteers to say, is just tell me about that. Because when someone presents you with that big piece of information, your next statement's really going to set the tone for that conversation. And if you're able to just say, thank you for sharing that with me, it might not have been easy, tell me about it, lets them know it's okay to tell you about it, right? You want to ask people in a way that tells them it's okay if you need to say yes, we'll talk about it. Right? So if suicide is part of what they need to stay safe from, let them talk about suicide and then figure out if they need immediate help, or is this something that is just starting to roll around in their head? It's still really important to talk about, but you want to establish immediate safety for sure. And so when you're listening to someone's story about crisis, our main goal is to give them some hope that they might be able to come up with some ways to ease their pain, that their situation may be treatable, that things could get better for them, and that they have some power in that process, that they have some control over their situation. And that there's somebody in the world that cares if they get through it or not, right? Even if it's a stranger on a crisis line, even if it's a sibling or a parent. I always tell people when I do suicide prevention workshops that, sometimes I'll do it for law enforcement, and I say, I'm not doing this suicide prevention for cops, I'm doing it suicide prevention for humans. Because we're more likely to use those skills at a family barbecue than in our professional lives, honestly. So all of us would be helped by having some skills about how to respond to that. So if you're the person at risk and telling your story, and you have found a person that is generous and caring enough to say, tell me about it, tell me what's going on, when you're creating a safety plan, it's only going to help you to be as honest and as forthright as you can be with that person. And if you don't have a person to be helping you create a safety plan, a couple things that I've seen people try are, sort of writing out their story and then go back and read it a couple days later. And sometimes, when we read things when we're sort of out of the moment, we're able to more clearly see some elements of it and understand things. Sometimes people will even record it and then come back and listen to it as if they were listening to somebody else tell a story. Or you can call Agora and they'll listen to you. So we're going to talk about the six steps that are involved in safety planning, and I'm going to give you a template, and you can take it home with you, or you can use it tonight if you'd like, whatever you would find helpful. And we'll go over each of these steps that are involved in a safety plan. So the first step, as these are working their way around, is going to be just recognizing that you need to use your safety plan. So to help the person think about what signs, what emotions, what behaviors, what thoughts? Are there two? I thought I got it on mine today. Not get it on one page.
Single-sided.
Oh, boo. I thought I had it on the page. Sorry. I've killed the trees. All right. So warning signs for somebody, again, it's the most helpful thing is if the person at risk is able to identify those warning signs. So these are not the warning signs that we think of when we're evaluating somebody who might be at risk of suicide. It's what signs do we see in ourselves that tell us, hey, something's going on. You might need to use that safety plan. You may be approaching a crisis of some kind. So what sort of warning signs do you guys think might occur for people or occur for you when a crisis is coming on?
Lack of sleep.
Lack of sleep, yes. Ugh, insomnia. And you never, like, wouldn't it be nice if when you're awake in the middle of the night and your brain is spinning that you were just having all those good thoughts about so many people love me and my life is so amazing? Yeah, that's not what we think though, right? It's like, it's always the most stressful thoughts that get stuck in your brain in the middle of the night and keep you awake. So insomnia, that's definitely one. What's another sort of warning sign that somebody might experience? Withdrawal, yes. I think isolation is one of the most dangerous symptoms, especially if we're struggling with depression. Because you start to feel like nobody really likes me. Why would they anyway? I feel worthless. And you start to withdraw from people and stay home alone, and you start to stew in those juices of depression. And that's when things can really spiral into a crisis, into maybe thoughts of suicide for people.
I think one of them, and this is for dealing with just about everybody, is the time of the day. Because, the later we are dealing with something during the day, the worse it seems to be, because we're already tired,
That's right.
swamped with all kinds of different things.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a really good one to keep in mind. So late at night is it's already sort of a danger signal. What else? Anything else comes to mind for you guys? So sometimes people will, say, well, I start to feel sad, or I start to feel anxious, or I notice that I can't stop, thinking the same thought over and over, or I'm crying and I maybe don't even know why. So whatever the warning signs are that the person at risk says, this is how I know something's approaching, then have them write down some of those warning signs, as many as they can come up with. Yeah?
I don't know exactly what I want to say. I have an image of what I want to say, but I don't know quite how to say it, so maybe help me out.
We will help you.
I know a person, related to, there are times when his mind is not working right and he's stressed about it, it's not working right, and I can see it.
Mm-hmm. What's it
I
look
hope he
like?
can see it.
Yeah, what does it look like to you?
Poor focus,
Mm-hmm.
which tells me there's some sort of inner struggle
Turmoil.
going on, and lack of articulation.
Okay.
It's like a functional thing,
Almost like cognitive
cognitive.
impairment to some
Impairment.
degree. Yeah, so I think that's a really good one, and I've seen that in people too. That inability to focus, inability to articulate what they want to say, like reacting in a big way to, kind of small events. So come on in, join us. So that can be a warning sign, and sometimes warning signs are more apparent to the people around us even than to ourselves. That's true. One warning sign that I think I've seen in a lot of people, especially when they're struggling with depression, is, when we think of depression, we think of sadness or, anger or irritability, and those can certainly all be symptoms, but the other one is just that, nothing, kind of lack of affect, that sort of numbness, like I don't feel happy, I don't feel sad, I just kind of don't feel anything. right? And for some people, that can be even more intolerable than feeling a lot of emotions. And for some people, that leads to self-harming behavior too. That desire to feel something is the one reason that some people engage in non-suicidal self-harm. Okay, so warning signs, those are some good ones to think of. So let's look at the next step. So once they've looked at warning signs, where's all my text? So once they've been able to recognize some warning signs and know that, hey, I might be approaching a crisis, I'm going to get my safety plan out and look at it. So the first, or step 2 on the safety plan is to start to identify internal coping mechanisms. So these are things that we can do for ourselves that will help us feel a little better, that will comfort us. Again, this isn't about solving all our problems long term, but it's what can I do that I don't even have to tell anybody else that this is going on for me, but I recognize that I'm starting to feel bad, so what makes me feel a little bit better? So when you guys are having a stressful day, what do you do that comforts you a little bit?
I go to the bar.
Well,
It works.
you get food, yeah. We'll evaluate that in a minute. But yeah, so go to the bar, and we actually will talk about kind of social contacts as the next thing. Okay. What else do you do to comfort yourself that you don't have to involve other people, just you on your own?
One of the things that works for me is getting on my bicycle. And,
Yes.
just taking off kind of gets me away from being too involved with the what ifs.
Gets
and
you
all
out of
that.
your head a little bit, yeah. And exercise in general is a really good
Right.
one for many people. Yep, gets us endorphins pumping. So exercise is a good one.
They spend time in nature, so they go for a hike or just go hang out outside.
Yes, I love that.
My one outlet is singing along to the radio,
Yes.
but with this satellite radio stuff, it's not sometimes the original lyrics that are driving me crazy.
Oh, no, that would get on my nerves. Singing it loud in the car, it's the best. Yep.
Breathing.
Breathing, specifically, do you have a certain...
Deep breaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, stopping. I had a friend that on his voicemail message, he always said, this is Jared, and call me back later. And now take one deep breath. And every time I got his voicemail, I love calling in. So, yeah, so some nice, deep, steady breathing. Yeah. What else do we do that comforts us a little?
Media, sometimes music,
Mhm.
television, movie.
Yeah. I have a whole playlist on YouTube of laughing babies that I pull up, and I just watch those for a while when I'm stressed. I have a lot of elephant videos. I love elephants. Puppies, those kind of things. Did you have
I
one?
spend my time with my cat.
Yes. They've done research that shows that just petting your dog or cat can actually lower your blood pressure. So interacting with our pets.
One thing that really works for me is picking up my granddaughter who's 3.5 and just going out to wherever to do whatever.
Mhm.
I seem to just forget about everything else when she's with me and we're doing things.
Yes, I have a 1-year-old grandson. His birthday's this week. Oh, it is the best, yeah. Okay, good. So those are awesome, good internal coping mechanisms. Meditation, taking a hot bath, drinking a cup of tea or a margarita, maybe. So this step is all about what can I do for myself that's going to ease my distress somewhat and sort of get me through the night or get me through the next hour. Right? But what if that doesn't work? What if someone engages in these self-care strategies and they're still feeling like, I'm getting more anxious, thoughts of depression, thoughts of suicide is still coming on? The next step is to then think of what kind of safe social contacts or social settings can you go to that will help distract you a bit. This is where distraction comes in handy. So a healthy social setting where you don't have to even tell anybody there that you're in distress. You don't have to talk to anybody, but you can just go and be in a place that will help you stay safe and distract you somewhat. So what kind of places might that be?
Coffee shop.
Yep, coffee shop,
Park.
parks, yes. Nature. Yeah. What other ones can you think of? Even like going to the living room and watching TV with your family, where you don't have to tell them, I'm freaking out. You can just go sit in the living room and be around other people and know that just being around other people is going to help keep you safe and distract you somewhat. And another thing that I like to keep in mind is that online communities can be really important, safe places for some of us. So a lot of people, play games online, which there can be some problematic elements to, but people get very attached to their online friends. I used to belong to a whole community of people. It wasn't a gaming thing, but it was just a forum where you would go on and chat about what books are you reading, what TV shows are you watching. And after being part of that community for a while, I felt like I genuinely had a group of friends who I knew I would never meet in person, and they were all over the world. But I knew that if I didn't show up one day, I'd get an email from one of them saying, hey, are you okay? What are you up to today? We didn't see you. Right? So online communities can be real sources of support for people. They can also be problematic in other ways. We know that social media is stressing people out in some ways. But if a person at risk identifies that they have an online community where they do feel supported and they do feel cared about, then put that up down in that safety plan. But what if that doesn't work, right? What if you've, helped them think through, like, what are places they can go? What are some healthy social settings? Now, like the bar. For some people, if they have a bar that they go to regularly and they have friends there who they know are going to, talk to them, and it's a healthy social setting, then that's fine. But if bars become problematic for somebody because they, drink too much, or get in fights with people, or maybe they start to feel bad because everybody else is with a partner and they're by themselves, maybe that's not the best thing to put on the safety plan. So that's where a helper comes in handy to help evaluate, like, is this a good, safe, healthy social situation, or maybe is it not the best one to use when you're feeling an impending crisis. So, but what if that doesn't work? So what if you've gone to the coffee shop, you've gone to church, you've gone to a park, but you're still feeling bad, and you're feeling like maybe things are not getting better. So that's when we try to identify family and friends who you could talk to and say, hey, I'm having a bad time, I need help. Can I talk to you about this situation? Maybe I'm having thoughts of suicide. Maybe I feel like I'm going to have a panic attack. Maybe I'm really starting to feel depressed. So who are people in their life that they could go to and talk to specifically about this, and maybe even share their safety plan with? In fact, I think that whoever goes in this portion of the safety plan, it's good for them to know they're on this safety plan ahead of time. So who in their life would want to help if they knew that the person was in distress? And again, when we're in the middle of the crisis, you think nobody would care, right? You can't think of anybody that would help. So if you're able, at another time when you're thinking more clearly, where you're feeling okay, you're able to say, well, my mom would want to know if I was having a bad time, and she would listen to me, or, my best friend would want to help if they knew.
What about whoever your therapy person is?
We'll get to them next, yeah. But yes, that's going to be a really important person to put on there.
I have a first cousin in Albuquerque who has a brother who has traumatic brain injury. He has heart problems and a couple other major things going on. And I visit her about once a month, and we get to share and kind of cry on each other's shoulder. But it relieves stress for both of us.
Yes, just being able to get those feelings out.
Yeah.
That's great. That's amazing that you have those people and that they have you. Yeah, so hopefully we can all identify at least a couple of people in our life, but some people have a hard time identifying those people, we know that. And so places like Agora or NAMI, support groups can become important, and they'll kind of go in the next section of this. So step 4 is ideally about thinking, who could I call at 3 in the morning and say, I'm freaking out, I'm starting to have really bad thoughts, I need to talk, could we talk? Or could I come over there? Or could you come to me? So who in their life could they really reach out to? And again, what if that doesn't work though? So then the next step is contacting professionals and agencies. So this is where you want to talk about, do they have a mental health care clinician? Do they have a therapist, a counselor? And get the number out and write it on the safety plan. Do they have somebody at NAMI maybe that they know they could call? Like maybe even, I don't know you, but I know that you're affiliated with NAMI and you'd be happy to help me if I needed it. This is where places like Agora hopefully come into a safety plan. Agora also answers the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and so that's a nationwide network of crisis centers. And I always like to give people both numbers, because the way that works is on the National Lifeline, if you dial it, it'll be answered first by the crisis center closest to you. So that probably would be Agora. But if we are already on the phone and we can't answer, it'll bounce and it'll go to New Mexico Crisis and Access Line. And if they can't answer, it'll bounce and go, I don't know, to Phoenix. And so you always get an answer, but it might be a crisis line in another state. It might be a different kind of crisis line that says, well, we just kind of triage and see if you're okay, and then we'll send somebody out to help you. Or it might be somewhere like Agora. So Agora is one of the last crisis lines in the country that just says, we'll talk to you for an hour if you need to. We're fine with that. You know. And if suicide is what you need to talk about, we'll talk to you about suicide, as long as we need to do that to help you figure out how to stay safe. So professionals and agencies, have them come up with who could they go to. You know, this could also include people like pastors, priests, mentors. If they're a student, maybe they have a teacher or an advisor that would be somebody on this place. It might be a personal contact in the last step, but it could come under professionals and agencies. Any other ones of these that you can think of? What other kind of professional people do you go to, or your loved ones go to, when you're having a crisis?
12-step meetings?
Yeah, 12-step meetings, support groups, and ultimately the emergency room. So that's always important to remind people that if you feel like you're really in trouble and you cannot stay safe, there's lots of people you can try, but ultimately you can call 911 and say, I need help, and hopefully they will send somebody out to help you. I know that Albuquerque now has a mobile outreach team, so that's a good thing to know. I don't know if there's any up here in Santa Fe.
We have a mobile crisis
Okay,
team.
I thought you did, yeah. So that would be a really good number to have on a safety plan. But again, when you're making the safety plan, you want to write those down and write down the phone number, so that when someone's in the middle of a crisis, they aren't scrambling to remember, who was it I was going to call, and I can't find their number anywhere, and the internet's not working. So write it down on the safety plan ahead of time.
I've not done it, but it's possible to take a phone number and have it show up on your home screen on your cell phone, so you don't have to find it. It's just right there, and you push it and it calls. You could do it for friends. You could do it for 911.
Yeah, you just make a link to that person's phone.
Right.
Yeah. I've done that for my husband because he can't always figure out how to use his phone. so I have my picture on there. He just pushes my face and calls me. My husband's super smart, but not super tech savvy. All right, good. So professional agencies are sort of what we're gonna use when those other steps of the safety plan have not been enough to help us stay safe. And then the next step is about making the environment safer. So if suicide is the issue, is the thing that we're trying to help somebody stay safe from, then we want to have already talked to them about whether they have a plan for suicide and what kind of means they intend to use. So are they going to use a firearm, medication, razor blade? And if suicide is an issue, then you really want to talk through how can we disable that means. Because if they're talking to us about a safety plan, we know that they've been able to voice some commitment to stay safe. And so if they have a gun in the house, boy, it'd be great to get that gun out of the house, because we know that having a firearm in your house greatly increases the odds of completing a suicide attempt. And so maybe if they were saying, I'm going to take medication, but sometimes those medications are things that they really need to take some of, right? So how can they figure out a way to safely have that medication available to them as needed, but maybe not have all 300 Vicodin available, right? So maybe they have a friend or a family member that would hold their medication for them and give it to them when it's time and give them the right amount. Maybe they could store their medication at work, so that if they did start thinking, I kind of want to take a handful of those pills, they'd have to drive all the way to work, and maybe by that time they would have had time to think it through and have figured out a reason to not take a handful of those pills. So again, it's less about us saying, here's what you should do, because, right, we all know how well we respond to people telling us what we should do. We do the other thing, right? And so we're going to be much more invested if we're able to say, well, here's what I think would work. Here's what I think is realistic to put in a plan. Because we never want somebody to think that this safety plan is a promise they've made that they can't keep, right? It's a promise they're making to themselves. And it's a living document, too. It's going to grow and change as needed. So making the environment safe might also be about preventing non-suicidal self-harm. So if they've talked about maybe cutting or burning themselves as something that they do to cope with anxiety, then we talk to them about, well, do you want to figure out a way to do something else? Would you like to find a less damaging way to cope with your anxiety? So again, telling somebody, don't do that, stop it, well, that's not probably going to work. So because that self-harm is doing something for them. It's helping relieve their distress in some way. So have they thought about something else that might help? So people that cut themselves sometimes will say, popping a rubber band against their skin, that little zing of pain is a distraction and it's painful, so it releases some endorphins. For some people that helps. Sometimes, people have a variety of ways of trying to avoid self-harm. Do you guys know of any other good ideas? Do you have experience with that? Sometimes ice on your skin will do the same thing. For some people, drawing on themselves. Now, for some people, it's the opposite. We talked to somebody recently who said, anytime I draw or put ice or snap my skin, anything that involves touching my skin makes me want to cut more. And so that's where it's so important for the person at risk to be the one to say, well, here's what's helped me in the past, or here's what I think might help me, so I'm going to put it on the plan. Right? Does that make sense? So making the environment safer, trying to get rid of things that maybe provoke anxiety. Maybe drinking makes them feel worse, so it would be good to get the alcohol out of the house, perhaps. If they know that being around a certain person tends to make them irritable, can they avoid being around that person? They might not be able to. It might be their parents. So sometimes you have to then talk about, well, how can you have this thing in your environment, whether the thing is a person or medication or whatever you have in your house that could be a danger to you, how can you have it in your house and still stay safe, and see if they can come up with some ideas. Yeah?
Hey, Molly, I have a question about things like computer cords or belts, because when you review some of these suicide deaths in children, a lot of times they're using that they're dying by hanging.
Right.
Whereas things that you might use will be different. So I'm curious.
Yeah. So we can't, we're never going to be able to make the environment 100% safe. So we know that we can't get rid of every cord in the house or every belt or even every razor blade. So what do they think they can do to help them stay safe, knowing that there's cords in the house? Because that, there's just some dangers that we're not going to be able to avoid. We know that really young children sometimes die by suicide by running in front of traffic. Well, they're gonna be in a parking lot at some point. They're gonna, and so there's always gonna potentially be things around that could increase our anxiety or lead us to harm ourselves with them. So do you guys have any thoughts about that? How do we stay safe from everyday objects that we have to keep in the house? Any thoughts?
I don't know that you can protect yourself from everyday objects. I think you go back to the motivation for how those objects are used and work on reducing the motivation to do harm.
Yeah. Maybe if the person said, well, every time I see that computer cord, it makes me, think of using it to hurt myself. Maybe they could put a sticker on the computer cord that says, remember your safety plan. Or, have them think of what could they tell themselves that might help them remember not to use it for self-harm. Maybe? Yeah?
Sort of a longer term thought, but we have this quasi option available depending on where you live for assisted outpatient treatment.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Santa Fe, I believe we don't have it because our county hasn't funded it. The gyms are required, but I believe in Albuquerque we do, and in Las Cruces.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you can get hold of those people and let them know, if you are a provider of care, that somebody needs intervention and nobody's taking it up, which is often the case. We all have horror stories of banging on doors and nobody, then the door doesn't
Getting
open.
nowhere, yeah.
If you go that route.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, it's important to think through what are those community resources that will be accessible to you, and make them, put them down on a safety plan so that you don't have to struggle to remember them when you're in the middle of a crisis.
Right.
So-
And I don't think AOT is it's not in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a longer term thing, but if it's a recurring problem, and you're working through these immediate crisis responses, it'd be a good idea to look further.
Yeah. Well, the safety plan is mostly about how am I going to keep myself safe for now? It's it's not necessarily about how am I going to treat my long-term issues, because we know that that's kind of a different can of worms. But it certainly could be noted on a safety plan, in that area where I'm going to contact my clinician, talk to them about long-term assistance with this problem. Community resources.
A couple of years ago, we had a lot of concern in the community, and there was an individual with mental illness who was killed by police. And we had a sort of a meeting just for people to talk about their feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the stories told at that meeting really impressed me, because one of the big things that triggers a crisis for people, many people, is just even being stopped by law enforcement.
Yeah.
Even for a routine thing. And this one individual had a letter from his doctor that he was told to give law enforcement if he ever got stopped. And he handed this letter to a police officer who I happen to know, who opened it, read it, and followed the instructions with interacting with him, and de-escalated the situation and had a good outcome as a result of it.
That's fabulous. Love that.
And it was, it was just thinking about the kind of situation that was going to be a crisis for many of the individuals we love and care for.
It's about preparing ahead, right? Knowing that I might have an incident where I need to tell somebody that I have an anxiety disorder, I have a traumatic brain injury, but I know that if I'm in the middle of a panic attack, I'm not going to be able to tell them. It's just like wearing, a medical ID bracelet saying I have diabetes. So if I'm behaving incoherently, or I'm losing consciousness, or I'm slurring my words, it might not necessarily be that I'm drunk. I might be having an insulin reaction, right? So we could do similar things for mental health, and just keep something honest that we're able to say, look, if I can't tell you, if I can't articulate to you, that I have an anxiety disorder, and when the police pull me over, I have a panic attack. I'm going to have trouble saying that to you, but if it's a thing already on the dashboard or something that you can, hand someone, yeah, it could maybe save their life.
Tom, do you think you could get a copy of that as a sample?
I don't remember who the person was. You, Terry does.
Yeah, that would be
I'm pretty
great.
sure it was
Yeah, I think it was Michelle.
I think I've seen similar things online too, like a
Yeah,
similar.
but it just really struck me, how good the outcome was from it.
What about using Smart 911 for that purpose too?
I think this was more immediate because there wasn't a 911 call. This was just the officer came up to somebody who was
Well,
acting
then that we
funny.
could use the Smart 11 if it was a.
Yeah, that's another resource.
Yeah, yes, it would be a good thing. It's a good prevention tool. I
Yeah,
agree.
yeah, just another tool in the toolbox. Right? Yeah.
Patty, are smart 911 calls arrangements all over the state, or is that just in a few communities?
See,
We've only heard about it in Santa Fe, but.
So I don't know about
I
that.
don't
What is
know
that?
either. That's where you go online and you build a profile about yourself or your family member.
So if someone's called, if they're called to your house or the residence of the person, they know their background or have a little more information on how to approach it, or they'll even call the crisis team to
That, yeah.
supposedly coordinate with the crisis team.
Because there's a lot of recidivism.
Yeah, yeah. I know Albuquerque has the Coast team at APD, which I think does a similar kind of thing.
Yeah. But the Smart 911 comes up with a 911 operator as soon as the call connects, and then it says, you put the information in. I have bipolar disease, I have whatnot, I have a dog, a very large dog, and other things, that first responders will be much more comfortable coming in,
They
knowing
know
what they're
ahead.
going to see rather than,
Being surprised.
right, or being very, very cautious and whatnot.
Yeah. Cool. I like that.
That's a
It's a
Santa Fe
national
program.
That's great.
Yeah, in August for the NAMI Info Talk, we're having 911, sheriff, police department, and paramedics come and talk about what happens when you call 911. And my 911 system will describe this program to you at that meeting.
That's good. I know in Albuquerque, APD has a policy now that if we call them to go out and check on somebody who's having thoughts of suicide, if that person says, I don't want your help, they leave. And so that has created a whole new world of anxiety for us, for sure, because we've called, so we rarely call the police on anybody that calls our crisis line. The only time we would ever call the police to do a welfare check is if we think the person's in immediate danger. That means they tell us, I'm planning to kill myself with a gun, and I have the gun with me now, and no, I can't tell you, I'll stay safe. Those are the only kind of situations that we would ever call the police, and we do it very hesitantly because it's often a mess. But if we really believe somebody's life is in immediate danger, like they're losing consciousness on the phone because they've taken a bunch of pills or they're bleeding to death, those are the times we would send police, and man, I hate it when we have to do it. But more and more recently, we've had APD tell us, yeah, we know that person and they don't want our help and we're not going. So that's a bummer for us. Yeah. All right, so making the environment safer. And then once you've sort of completed the plan, and I believe on the template that I gave you, there's also a section at the end there about listing medications that they take, because again, if they're in the middle of a crisis and they do need to get emergency intervention, it's good to have that available so they don't have to stop and think, what pills do I take and what's the dosage? Like who of us can quickly come up with that material? So that can be a good thing to just jot down on the safety plan. And then at the end of that template, it says, what's one thing that is worth staying alive and worth staying safe for? And so see if they can think of a thing that, again, it's not that it's not for your benefit if you're the helper, it's for their benefit. What can I say to myself that will remind me why I want to stay safe and why I want to use this plan, because I made a commitment to stay safe, because my family loves me, because my dog loves me, because, you know, whatever they can come up with as a reason to keep going and stay safe. So then talk to people about where you're going to keep the safety plan. Is it on your phone? Is it on your fridge? Is it on your nightstand? Where will you keep it? That it will be easily accessible and you'll be able to see it and remember that you have it. And then what are the challenges that might get in their way? Like, do they already know that there's going to be some barrier as part of that plan? And if there is, like, go back and reevaluate that step. And for some people, they may say, you know, I don't have anybody in my circle of family or friends that I want to talk to about this stuff. I just don't. So then they're going to leave that section blank for now. They may think of somebody later, but it's not like if somebody's going through the safety plan and they say, I don't want to do this step, well, it's their plan. They get to do what they do. And the plan is meant to be their ideas for what will keep them safe, right? Not what we think is going to help, because that's part of our own safety plan. Yeah.
How do you deal with people that, you know, say, hey, I'm fine, I don't need this, and you know damn well they do, and you can't, there's no way you can persuade them, you know already that you're not going to talk them into it. How do you negotiate that difference of opinion?
That's hard. What do you guys think?
Maybe do it with them, saying, hey, I'll make a safety plan for myself too, or if it's a family setting, everyone makes a safety plan, just don't feel isolated.
Kind of normalize it.
Yeah,
Or-
that's a good idea.
Or maybe just one page at a time, instead of having a huge folder to go through, maybe just one step.
Yeah.
What about
Or
introducing like other things to be safe from other than oneself, or one's, like, the house fire, or what would you do if a house fire? Or, you know, you have a broken window and it's pouring rain.
It's a type of emergency.
Just other
plan.
things that,
Mhm.
that you need to have some sort of safety.
It's like
consciousness
like
of,
doing
and then
fire
integrate
drills and-
this
Yeah.
stuff kind of into that.
Sure,
conversation.
I don't see why not. I mean, this, you know, we're talking tonight about it's kind of specifically around mental health crises, but yeah, it's like we should all do fire drills in our house. We should all have some plan for what do you do if our smoke alarm went off a couple weeks ago. We were just watching TV and all of a sudden our smoke alarm went off. We were like, what is that noise? Like we didn't even, it took a minute for us to, it's smoke alarm. Oh, there's smoke everywhere in our house. And we were just watching TV obliviously. So, yeah, so planning for like a variety of situations where you need to know what you're going to do to stay safe. Like, you know, kids in school today do active shooter drills.
One suggestion when we're working with our loved ones, creating a plan, is to have them fill out a mental health power of attorney, so that if that crisis does come up, as parents or siblings or spouses, you have the ability to talk to medical personnel, because
Yes.
many of you know, if your loved one's at a hospital, they don't even have to tell you that he or she is there, unless you have a power of attorney that gives you that permission.
Right. Oh, that's a really good point. That would
I
be a
can get
really good
that.
thing.
Form. NAMI has that form, or did it years ago.
I think you have to get it notarized
Yeah.
when they sign over power of attorney.
But something I heard I will, I'll find one and send it to you.
That's a great idea. Yeah. That's a really
Something that I heard today from Presbyterian's Emergency Department Director is that people can have that, and they can, at the time of their crisis, can say, you know, I
Revoke it?
revoke it.
that.
Right. Oh, man. Yeah. But it might still help to have it in place, you know.
Yeah, I mean, not everyone knows that, so if you're.
Yeah.
Messina Valley doesn't know that. I mean, it's worth having.
Yeah, we win
It's-
this an inch at a time.
Or the,
Yes,
or the
yes.
psychiatric advanced director.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that's like more, that's different than this, it's just, it's more.
It's a little more, it's when the safety plan is not enough, then that kind of thing comes into play. Yeah. Oh, good point.
And how do you file that? Where do you put
It
it?
just, you have it. Yeah, you keep it.
You
You
keep
keep it.
Don't you have to go to court for that?
No.
Get
No.
approved?
No.
You probably have to have it notarized, maybe, I'm
We
guessing.
probably need to do that at a different info talk.
Yeah.
That's an important topic, but I
That
think
is
it's
a
beyond
really-
the scope of what we're gonna do right now.
Well, we had somebody come and talk about psychiatric advanced director.
Right, Deb Axel did that, but, and she can come back and do it again, but we,
That's a really good point, yeah. All right, so this is just some sort of quotes from people who said that the safety plan did help them get through a crisis. We have callers, we'll sometimes, we'll get through a call, we'll make a safety plan with them, and then if they've been at imminent risk for suicide, we will offer to call them back. That's the only time that we can do that, because we don't have staff to do follow-ups with everybody, but we'd like to. But often our callers will call us back and say, you guys really helped me last week, or you really helped my son, and so that's always good to say. So the safety plan, again, it's a thing people might decide not to use, but if they've gone to the trouble of working through it and making it and talking to you about it, if one person says, well, I went to all that trouble, maybe I'll go ahead and give it a shot, then it's worth doing, I think. All right, how are we out on time?
we're just about ready for questions.
Okay, go for it. Let me have it. Questions? Thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you. It
Oh,
was an
no.
outstanding presentation.
All right. Well, if you think of anything that you want to talk about later, feel free to contact me at this information. Send me an email. I'll be happy to give you a call and answer any questions I can. And keep Agora in mind. I left some brochures and cards over here, and I think you guys already have some of our stuff around too. And remember, anybody, like any of you, can call us and just say, I just need to talk for a while about a thing that happened. You don't have to be in crisis. We don't ask people's names. I try to identify our callers, again, unless somebody's in immediate danger. That's the only time. We ask our callers, like, what's your zip code? Are you affiliated with the military? A couple questions like that, but it's never to identify anybody. It's just to try to help us get funding to keep our service free. And if callers ever say, I don't want to even tell you my zip code, that's okay. We'll certainly still talk to them. So,
Excellent.
all right, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.